The ScaleUp Journey, Part 1. I've been running a business for a few years and are enjoying a certain level of success, but maybe you're beginning to feel that things are a little out of control. You might even be feeling overwhelmed, not sure if you're doing things right. You may have got where you are without even realizing quite how you got there and are wondering, how do you manage the next steps and how do you keep control of things? You may be increasingly coming across challenges managing team stress or cash flow pressures, and perhaps you also have half an eye on wanting to make sure you're building a valuable business, the kind of business that someone might want to buy at some point. And you may even be wondering if your business is in fact scalable. Scaling a business is not easy, and by now you probably realize that there isn't one simple tip or magic bullet that is suddenly going to deliver phenomenal success. And the stats prove it. Half of startups fail within 5 years, 2/3 within 10, and of all businesses, 99.3% remain with less than 50 employees, and in fact nearly 96% remain with less than 10 employees. In our experience of working with several hundred business owners like you over the last few years, there are two things that separate out those that successfully scale from those that do not. Firstly, working to a proven system and strategies to scale and build value, including an understanding of the scale-up journey and the difference from linear growth. In other words, properly planning and executing scaling up and not just drifting into growth. Secondly, understanding and harnessing the power of peer-to-peer working monthly with a small group of like-minded business owners that act as a sounding board of their peers who can share their experiences and help to overcome barriers to scaling up along the way, as well as keeping each other accountable to the key things that will scale their business and avoid getting distracted. So let's take a look at what we mean by the scale-up journey. Scaling up is a series of stepping stones or staging posts, not a straight line or even a wiggly line of growth. The first one of these, if you think about it, the first stepping stone is at 1 employee, just us. The second is typically 3 to 5 employees, the third 8 to 12, then 20 to 25, 40 to 60, 250 to 600, etc. and so on. If you prefer to think about it in revenue terms, then broadly speaking, we're looking at up to around 100k, 500,000, 1 million, 2 to 2.5 million, 5 million, 25 to 60 million, etc. Now, why these numbers? Well, basically it's related to team sizes and the number of teams. So let's look at it in a little bit more detail. The first step is basically you on your own. We can build a great little business, perhaps a consulting type model, nicely profitable, and we can climb that ladder of success for the one-person business, and that is great. But it is different. It is a different kind of business from the 3 to 5 employee business. The success ladder for a 3 to 5 business is different. It is a different ladder. We've got to manage a little more complexity in terms of communication. We've got to make sure that we have the right business model that enables us to pay decent salaries. And it's no longer okay to have good and bad months where we could cope taking less out 1 month, but we can't ask our staff to do that. Not to mention that we've begun now to face the challenge of recruiting and managing staff. So we've begun the transition from owning a job, and hopefully a well-paid one at that, to owning a real business. The 3 to 5 employee staging post is a great place to be, and we've now got a team that is big enough to benefit from collaborative thinking, as well as 3 to 5 people actively building the business rather than one person trying to do everything. But still, we're small enough for it not to be too hard to manage and control. But we can't just step from the 1-person ladder to the 3 to 5-person ladder at the same level. We have to join at a lower rung, at a lower level. And if you think about it, we're going to have to invest in the transition, even if it is just in terms of paying additional staff. But we're probably also going to have to think more about making our lead generation activities more consistent. So we're going to have a dip or a valley before we're able to start to climb up the new ladder. And these valleys are sometimes referred to as the valleys of death, because if we get it wrong, we can either languish for ages in a valley where we're busy but struggling to keep control and probably not earning healthy profits. We're wondering where the cash is going, and we might slip back to the previous ladder, or we might even kill the business altogether. And this is why most businesses do not get to the 3 to 5 staging post. If they try, many end up taking on an employee, getting it wrong, or the employee leaves, and then we're back where we started. So this is perhaps the most obvious or easy to understand transition, but the same happens throughout this scale-up journey. The ladder for the 8 to 12 business is different from the 3 to 5 ladder. Likewise, the 20 to 25 success ladder is different again, and so on. Each time there is a valley of death in between, and we need to recognize this, and we need to plan the transition from one ladder to the next. We need to recognize where we are and to plan for what the business will look like and what the business will need at the next staging post. And we need to think about what needs to happen on the way to build and climb that ladder, including how long do we expect it to take. For example, is it our 3-year plan, or perhaps 5-year, or is it shorter or longer? And how much cash will we need to get us through that valley of death? And can we manage the investment from cash flow, for example, or do we need to access additional finance? From 3 to 5 to 8 to 12, we then need to start thinking about systems, particularly lead generation and sales, to give us a consistent stream of new business, and account management also to make sure that we retain and grow our existing clients. And we've now got to the stage where one person probably can't really handle everything, so we typically need to think about a number 2 in charge, or a right-hand person in the business. And we might need to think increasingly about quality and perhaps things like ISO. We also often see here that businesses find they have ended up with lots of different applications and tools running specific tasks within the business, and now's the time to look at consolidating those. But this is another great staging post. We're now big enough to really benefit from the collective and individual thinking and working, and we're less vulnerable to 1 or even 2 people leaving. And we're also still not so large that communication becomes a real issue, although we do need to ensure communication is strong within the business. From 8 to 12 and 20 to 25 is another big step, and often we need to think about whether to acquire or perhaps to merge to get us there quickly, or whether we feel we can do it organically. Communication and a layer of management become key. Financial management becomes crucial, and is often the time we need a financial director or a chief financial officer within the business. And so on as we go up through the stepping stones. Recognizing where we are, what is the next staging post? What does the success ladder for that staging post look like? How is it different? And planning that transition from one ladder to the next becomes paramount in successfully scaling, as well as ensuring that we have climbed the ladder to our current staging post before we try to jump to the next ladder. If we're going to navigate the valley of death in between, we need to do so from a solid platform where the business is operating as efficiently as possible first. And by the way, it's perfectly fine to identify the staging post you want to stop at and then run your business to be really successful on that ladder. You don't have to keep moving from one ladder to the next, but just be careful not to slip back. The ScaleUp Journey, Part 2. In order to successfully scale, there are 4 key areas or pillars that need to be got right: strategy, people, execution, and cash. And this is where the system and strategies to scale come in. Any business that is not performing well on all 4 pillars will find they get stuck. It could be early on, or it could be once they have already built a significant business with several hundred employees, perhaps, and millions in turnover, but they will still hit a ceiling somewhere. So let's look at those in a little bit more detail. You need to have the right, truly differentiated strategy and scalable business model. You need to be able to attract, hire, and retain the right people to deliver on the right strategy. You need to get the right people to execute the strategy with ruthless efficiency and focus and in the right way, and you need to manage the cash as you go. Businesses will fail to scale or just fail if they have not got all 4 of the above right. The emphasis of the 4 pillars may change depending on where you are, but not the pillars themselves. And we've already mentioned some of the key differences for the different ladders, and when planning the transition to the next ladder, we need to do so in light of the 4 pillars. So what will it mean in terms of our strategy, in terms of our people, in terms of how we execute that strategy, which, by the way, includes our lead generation, and what are our key cash requirements, and how are we going to ensure that we are on top of managing the cash? Overarching everything are 2 further principles to be aware of. One is leadership and the other is building for value. Leadership in the early days is about developing ourselves as a leader. But once we get to the 8 to 12 staging post, then we need to really start building leaders beneath us. Also, before that 8 to 12 staging post, delegation is typically about delegating the things that we are not good at and don't want to be distracted by. So, for example, admin or bookkeeping, either by outsourcing or by recruiting. As we scale beyond this point, we need to start thinking about delegating the things that we are good at if we want to create the kind of business that is not overly reliant on us. So for example, if we are the person that brings in all of the new business because we love it and no one else can do it quite like us, whilst that may work up to this point, it will cause us to stall much beyond there. So we need to find a way that we can begin to delegate the things that we are good at to others. Building for value is also essential if we want to ensure that we create value for ourselves and potentially other investors in the business. Do we understand how to create value within the business so that we build the kind of business that will give us options in the future, whether we want to sell at some point, whether we want to step back from the day-to-day running, or even pass down to a family member? Because we can guarantee that we will all exit our businesses one day, willingly or not. And it will be great not to have to close the doors on the business when we do, and even better if it can fund whatever it is that we want to do next. So there we have it. Now we have an understanding of the scale-up journey and why it is important to recognize it as a series of staging posts and valleys in between, and we have the framework of a proven system for scaling up.